You're listening to Dakota Spotlight. My name is James Wolner. This is the final scheduled episode of the season, but keep your eyes and ears open for bonus and update episodes.
Hello?
Michelle, can you hear me now?
Hello?
Mark, can you hear me?
I can.
Fantastic.
You did good.
All right, so Mark, Michelle, I really don't know what to say.
I don't know how I would do it either.
In this episode, we're covering a lot. I'll share a new working theory I've developed about why Brian may have killed Ray Dahms. We'll listen in on a conversation between Mark Hendrickson and Michelle, two people who never met until recently, but whose lives were both altered by the consequences of Brian's actions. We'll also look at how Brian capitalized on his acquittal in Michelle's case, how he went on to commit more crimes in later years, and how he continued to manipulate and fool others to the very end. And finally, we will return to Rapidan to reunite with Ray's friends and hear how his death shaped their lives across the decades. Welcome back to Meanwhile in Mankato, Lies, Silence, and Murder in Minnesota. This is episode 6. Brian Hendrickson died in 2018, so I never had the chance to ask him, but I certainly hope he was satisfied with the Minnesota justice system. He was protected in every way. We want our defendants to be protected and their rights upheld. Brian's certainly were. Maybe the simple reason that no one in that Sauk Center courtroom, including Michelle, ever learned about his criminal past was because it was legally suppressed. If so, he'd been treated more than fairly. But legal vindication wasn't enough for Brian. He wanted praise, and he got it. Soon after the trial, a letter to the editor ran in the St. Cloud Times under the headline, "Jury verdict cleared man, but newspaper didn't." It was written by a woman I'll call Jane. She lived in Sauk Center, and she knew the Hendricksons. Her letter read almost like a defense brief. She scolded the paper for printing lengthy articles about the accusations. She portrayed Brian as a man nearly destroyed by lies, yet noble enough to forgive the troubled girl. She ended with a jab at the editor. "You helped destroy a man's name. Don't you feel any responsibility to restore it? I find your silence reprehensible." The paper called Brian to set up an interview. I'm sure he jumped at the chance, and they printed a glowing 1,200-word feature article titled "Man Acquitted on Sex Charges Lobbies for Change in the System." A photo showed Brian in a plaid shirt, Carol at his side. The article cast him as a man put through hell, yet full of grace, determined to reform the system that almost failed him. I tracked down Jane, of course, and got her on the phone. She's 85 now, sharp, articulate, with clear memories of Brian and his family. She remembered her letter to the editor and the article that followed. She told me she'd known the Hendricksons well back then in Sauk Center, especially Carol, Brian's wife at the time. You know by now the question I wanted to ask her. Did you know Brian had murdered someone? It's the same question I'd love to ask the hiring manager at the Minnesota homeschool, or whoever approved foster parents back then, or anyone on the jury in Sauk Center. And I did ask Jane that question. Unlike Brian's foster daughter, who had answered, "I think you must have your stories crossed. The Brian I knew would never hurt anyone," Jane said, and I quote, "What?" I took that as a no. No, she hadn't known Brian had murdered anyone. Not until now, and certainly not back then, when she wrote that scathing letter to the editor that sparked the glowing feature on Brian. Jane asked me to share more about Brian's crime and the murder. After I did, she told me that she wasn't feeling well. She felt like she might throw up. I got a sense that the nausea she was feeling wasn't the queasiness of picturing Ray's body on the floor of the gas station, or the pool of blood, or the shotgun in Brian's hand. I think she felt sick because she was realizing that after all these years, people she trusted, people she thought she knew, had kept her in the dark about something important and terrible. And with that letter to the editor, she'd been an unknowing pawn in someone else's game. Maybe, too, it suddenly hit her that the teenage girl on the witness stand might have been more credible than she realized. I won't read all 1,200 words of that St. Cloud Times article. It's too much glowing praise for a con man, and honestly, when I do try to read it, I feel like I might throw up. But I will share one quote, a line from Brian himself describing how he felt after his trial. Quote, "After it's all over, you feel like if you can survive that, you can survive anything. I don't think there's anything that can happen that could be worse, other than the death of a close family member." Unquote. Maybe Ray Dahms' family in Rapidan could have confirmed that for him. Lorraine, Larry, Randy, and Rodney Dahms might have said, "Yeah, Brian, losing a family member is worse. Definitely worse." But of course, the St. Cloud Times reporter never mentioned Ray Dahms, never mentioned that Brian had murdered anyone. And why is that? Well, I don't know this for a fact, but at this point, I'd bet good money it's because the reporter didn't know and didn't take the time to find out. In Brian's world, almost everyone and everything was a pawn, even the local newspaper. So, while Michelle was dismissed and turned away, Brian walked free, and that article helped transform him into a symbol of innocence, leaving Ray Dahms buried a second time. As you've heard in this story, Mark Hendrickson has struggled ever since learning the truth about his brother, Brian, and he regrets never having the chance to apologize to the Dahms family. When I told Michelle that Mark was still wrestling with this and suggested the two of them might talk, she agreed, and so did Mark. And so the three of us jumped on a call, and for the most part, I just listened.
Hello?
Michelle, can you hear me now?
Hello?
Mark, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, fantastic.
You did good.
All right, so Mark, Michelle, I really don't know what to say.
I don't know how I would do it either. Michelle, I have to say, this is a phone call that I would have never, ever thought that I would be involved with, and that I would ever know you, other than to hear the rumors at the time, that I did about the case and everything like that. But I have to say, I'm amazed by what James has told me about your life afterward, and mostly I just want to say on behalf of the family, this is just something I've got to get off my chest, but we're deeply sorry. We're deeply sorry for everything that happened to you at the hands of Brian. It'll never go away, the guilty feelings and stuff like that, but to just know that you've made an incredible life for yourself. It feels good.
I appreciate that. And, when I heard your story that you're holding on to this of your brother's doing, I felt bad for you because it had nothing to do with you. Those are his footsteps that he's done and not
Right.
the shoes that you're wearing. You know what I'm saying?
So, the guilt came from idolizing somebody that turned out to be, quite a bit less than a hero.
Right, and I'm sure that had to be disappointing being a little brother and idolizing him your whole life and then find out this deep, dark secrets of his life and his choices that he made. And like I said, that should have nothing to reflect on you, and I hope that you find peace knowing that it had nothing of your nature, yes, it's part of your DNA, but that's still his own being. And
Right.
I appreciate that you calling, and I appreciate, the apologetic part of the situation that he, had done to me. I appreciate that. And as for him in my life, he was rent-free from my life when I walked out. I never until I got that phone call where it was dead, buried, and gone, that it resurfaced. And then, I think it resurfaced for a reason, and maybe this is just a full circle that need to be connected, tied, and healed.
Can you tell me, what was life for you like after that? And then,
How was life afterwards? Well, afterwards, for a couple of years, I was still not, I was still partying, living life, doing my own thing. And then just one day, I just said, I'm more than this. I deserve better than this. And I just stopped everything, and I just went on, met someone, and then from there on, I just built myself up, and we have a wonderful life. I have a wonderful family, beautiful grandchildren. I'm very healthy. I continue to help people. I've been a nurse for many, many years.
Nice.
I did retire from that in 2017, and we still run our business. We have a trucking company. And
good. Wow.
We've been running that ever since 2008, and still going strong.
You sound strong. That's the thing that's really interesting.
Oh, I am strong.
I'm very pleased.
Trust me.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Good.
I only may be 5'3", but I can stand my own. I got real thick shoulders.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, and again, like I said, it's just I can't tell you. On behalf of the rest of the family, they don't know anything. I just found out about that I'd be talking with you really in the last day or so, and it was amazing. It's amazing for me because I did a lot of research on Brian, but not so much. My research was more on the actual murder that he committed, and that I understand that you do nothing about.
Not one iota. Nope, not one thing.
Which horrifies me on the level of where's that state that's protecting you
right
from creeps.
Yep.
We'll come back to this conversation in a moment. Dakota Spotlight recently visited the Minnesota Historical Society in the Twin Cities. They're the custodians of many of the state's records, including prison files. They handed over 2 mugshots and a list of Brian's parole dates. His prison file, though, is restricted until 2048. In another collection are the records from the Minnesota Homeschool and Sauk Center, stacks of employee cards. But when the staff pulled the box to check for Brian's record, they looked up and shook their head. His card wasn't there. Why doesn't that surprise me at all? No, I'm not suggesting he never worked there. He did work there, but if anyone's past was destined to be erased from those files, of course it would be his. I've promised to tell you about what became of Brian Hendrickson, his later crimes, his death, and his remains. At the time of the Sauk Center trial, Brian was still married. Sometime afterwards, his wife Carol divorced him. She's chosen not to take part in this podcast, and we respect that. There are questions I'd love to ask her, but I can imagine what a painful and confusing place she found herself in, married to a man who could lie so easily and convince almost anyone of almost anything. My hunch is that she didn't even know the full truth about the murder when she married Brian. Here's Gary Hendrickson again, Brian's brother. Gary cut ties with Brian long ago, but he stayed in touch with Carol and his nephew.
I see his son, who, amazing enough, this guy turned out to be a really good kid. And he's just a great kid and a great family. Thank goodness for his mom, Carol, who was Brian's wife. And, I've asked her many, many times, what the hell did you see in him? And she said, lies. So convincing. She said, if I had $1 for every time he said, I'm gonna, she said, I'd be a multimillionaire.
Let's return briefly to Mark and Michelle. Marla here is Mark's sister.
But is there anything that you'd just like to say? And whatever it is, I can take it.
Oh, the only thing that I could say now that I've heard all this stuff is that, you know what? I'm glad that his family, like his son, is doing well. The only thing I would like to really know is like his wife at the time, Carol.
Yeah. Carol is a dear friend of mine, and she was supporting her husband as best she could, and feels guilty as all get out. But like Marla, I mean, they were supporting who they knew. They were supporting the one that they loved at the time, and I can't think of a way to make that sound good. I don't know. I love them both. I support them. I mean, I love them both, and I know that there's. I mean, Brian was just such a con artist. I can't begin to. Even with Carol, there's things that I've told her from my discovery when I'd done this several years ago, that I told her things, and she would just go, "Oh my goodness, it just never ends, does it?"
Oh, that's too bad.
It is too bad, and while I don't know everything about Carol's situation, her story seems to live in that blurred space where love, denial, and survival mix. She was dealing with a man skilled in deception and capable of violence. What is certain is that she finally left him, and thank goodness she did, for herself and for her son.
Suddenly, the world I used to know, I see it differently. You woke me from a dream, now here's reality.
In the years after the divorce, Brian's life seemed to unravel. Alcohol and addiction took hold, and he drifted towards eastern South Dakota, where his father, Orvin, had also settled late in life. The two men still saw each other from time to time. Here's Gary Hendrickson again.
And I asked my dad, I said, why do you still even have a relationship with him? I asked him, and he said, I don't know. I think what it was, ultimately, is the alcohol connected him. My dad would go hang out with him for, a period of time, and hey, they were drinking buddies, right? Maybe it's a Band-Aid for the past. I think that was the connection.
If you don't need me, just let me know when I go.
We get a clearer glimpse of Brian's world in 1995 when their father died. Orvin had made Gary executor of his will, and when the family gathered near Watertown, South Dakota for the funeral, Gary got a first-hand look at Brian's crowd, people deep in addiction.
I went to the funeral, and Brian walks in. And, basically I just told him, I said, hey, you had the right to be here, but I said, stay out of my way. I think he was living in Clear Lake, South Dakota, and had a girlfriend who was a meth head, so she was a train wreck. Yeah, I mean, she was high as a kite. I think when she came to the funeral, I think I saw her the day before for about a minute. She was high as a kite then. She couldn't hardly keep her head up, so yeah. So did the funeral, and I never saw him again.
At some point, Brian moved back to Minnesota, and by 1999, his name began drifting once again through court records, not for murder or rape this time, but for a steady string of smaller crimes that echoed his old habits. It started with a bad check in Meeker County. Then in 2004, a police chase in Stearns County, felony fleeing a law enforcement officer, followed by a DWI arrest, driving while intoxicated. In 2009, he was back behind the wheel again, another DWI, this time in Grant County, which led to a court-ordered civil commitment for chemical dependency. In Minnesota, a civil commitment isn't a criminal sentence. It's a legal process allowing the state to place someone in treatment when addiction or mental illness makes them a danger to themselves or others. The next year brought yet another drunk driving conviction. And then came May of 2011, the incident that would finally send Brian back to prison at St. Cloud. Now that we've come to know Brian, we don't need the film crew anymore, do we? It's easier to picture him now. He's just older, and this time in the little town of Herman, Minnesota, population 430. He's weathered by drink and 63 years of life. Just imagine him standing on the porch of his small apartment. There's a light drizzle in the air, and Brian is staring down the block towards a house he knows well. It's his former girlfriend's house. I'll call her Mari. The two had met in a treatment program in St. Cloud. Not long after, Mari suffered a stroke, and Brian moved to Herman to help during her recovery. For a while, he lived with her, running errands, helping around the house, keeping her company. But by May of 2011, the relationship had soured. Mari said it was a mess, and it had run its course. So, Brian had rented a small apartment just a few doors down, close enough that he could still see her place from his porch. When Mari planned a trip with her sister, she asked Brian to look after her home and her cat named Chipper. Neighbors on the little street knew she was out of town. Each day they saw Brian coming and going, always alone. At night they could see the glow of her television through the big front windows. Clearly, Brian was cat-sitting, house-sitting, and hanging around. Then came the morning of May 14th. Neighbors noticed that the blinds in Mari's home were suddenly closed, something no one had ever noticed before. Another neighbor spotted him sitting on his porch, staring down at Mari's house through the rain. By 1:45 p.m., Chipper the cat appeared at a neighbor's back door, drenched, shaking, meowing to be let in. The cat never went out in the rain and couldn't have gotten outside on his own. When the neighbor carried Chipper home, he opened Mari's front door and was met by smoke. He backed away and tried to call 911, but his phone wasn't working, so instead he just ran down the street to Brian's apartment. He burst inside and found Brian lying on his bed. "Mari's house is on fire," the neighbor told him. Brian mumbled something, the words unclear. He didn't even get up. When firefighters arrived, Brian finally wandered over to the scene. One firefighter had to physically stop him from going back in. Several people heard him say, "Just let it burn, she's got plenty of money." A sheriff's deputy later reported that Brian smelled strongly of alcohol, slurred his words, and cursed at emergency workers. He refused a breath test, but admitted he'd been drinking nearly a half-gallon of whiskey a day for weeks. He was on probation at the time, forbidden to drink at all, and the deputies arrested him on the spot. Thankfully, no one and no cat was hurt in that fire. Investigators later searched the scene and found a trash can in the basement filled with charred wood, clear evidence someone had set it ablaze. They concluded the fire was intentional, started by Brian. He was charged with first-degree arson. The trial wouldn't take place for another 2 years, and during that time, Brian still managed to get into trouble. Arrested for impersonating a police officer, no less. Which raises a question, knowing how well and easily he lied, how skilled he was at deception. How many times did he pretend to be someone he wasn't, or commit crimes no one ever discovered? How much will we simply never know? Gary Hendrickson again.
I wouldn't put anything past him. Fortunately, maybe there's only one person dead because of this creep. My wife asked me one time, she goes, "Do you think he had the capability of killing again?" I said he could have been a serial killer and nobody would have known it. Because I don't think he had any remorse for any of that stuff.
When it came time for the arson trial, Brian chose to represent himself. After all, who could lie on Brian's behalf better than Brian? In court, he spun a new story. He'd only had a few drinks that morning. When the neighbor woke him, he claimed he ran down to the house shouting, "Don't let it burn!" The blinds, he said, were always closed, and he wasn't drunk, and Chipper the cat, he insisted, often went out in the rain. But for once, Brian Hendrickson wasn't able to walk between the raindrops himself. This time he wasn't believed. He was convicted of first-degree arson and sentenced to 4 years in prison. It's uncertain how long Brian actually served for this one, but I'm guessing it wasn't very long at all. In fact, the end of his life was already drawing closer.
I think the last 5 years of his life, he was just a drunk, just alcohol taking over.
Brian Hendrickson died on March 2nd, 2018 in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I've already mentioned that there was no service, and at this point maybe you understand why. Gary, Mark, Marla, and Brian's son, none of them were interested in honoring this man's life. A life built on lies and betrayal didn't feel like something worth celebrating. Mark Hendrickson again.
When he died, I thought, thank God, finally, he can't harass his son anymore. He can't make his son feel bad. His son used to have me run cover for him so that he never had to talk to him and that he wouldn't interfere with his family.
However, Brian did not die alone. There was one person who stood by him to the end. The obituary stated the following: "No service will be held. His belongings are being donated to several organizations by Brian's close friend, Giles Korff." Poor Giles Korff. I have to tell you about him, because he wasn't just Brian's last friend, he was Brian's last victim. I don't know much about Giles, but I get the sense the two men sort of joined forces to live out their last few years together as roommates. Two aging bachelors who just needed company. If I had to guess, I'd say Giles probably paid the bills while Brian found a way to live rent-free. Who knows? But when Brian died, Giles took it upon himself to handle his best friend's final arrangements. He collected Brian's belongings and contacted the family. Gary remembers getting the call and keeping it brief. He hadn't seen Brian in over 20 years and wanted no part of his orbit.
I think my words are, I think the world's a better place that he's gone.
The conversations Giles had with Mark Hendrickson were longer, and it was during those talks that poor old Giles learned just how much Brian, his best friend, had lied to him. One by one, the stories unraveled. At one point, Giles pleaded with Mark, but he was in the Navy, right? In Vietnam? Giles had made sure Brian received some small thank you for your service acknowledgement at the home where he died. Here's Mark again speaking with me and Michelle.
Oh my gosh, are you gonna tell me that he also didn't serve in the Navy? No, he didn't serve in the Navy because he was in prison for murder.
Oh, that poor guy.
He's co-opted my other brother's life, Gary, who did go to Vietnam.
One of Brian's lies even led to Giles taking Brian's body to the wrong place.
Called to tell me, that he had brought the body to St. Cloud so he could be with his wife. Now, Carol is not dead, and yet that's the story that Brian had told him. He told his best friend that his wife Carol was killed in a car accident in St. Cloud, and that's where she was buried. And that's why he brought the body, Brian's body, to Sauk Center. Because I said, why did you bring it here? It didn't make any sense to me. He said, well, that's where Carol's buried.
Oh, wow.
I said, you mean the Carol that I talked to last night?
Giles Korff, the last friend and the last victim of Brian Lee Hendrickson. He has passed away now too. May he rest in peace. And if you're wondering what became of Brian's remains, Michelle wondered that same thing on the call with Mark. And it turns out Brian still hasn't come to rest. Not exactly.
So what do they do with him?
What's that?
What did you do with him? If she wasn't there, where did he go? Or did he?
Do you really want to know? He's not buried. I have the ashes.
Oh. Well, maybe you should get rid of him out of your house.
Yeah. To be honest with you, they're sitting in a spot that I don't look at. I don't even pay any attention to.
This information caught both Michelle and me off guard, and we both immediately started offering unsolicited advice, which, to his credit, Mark said he appreciated. It was time, we told him, to do something with Brian's ashes and move on. He told us he was keeping them for Brian's son, who, he added, had already made it clear doesn't want them.
And that's his son?
That's his son. But he doesn't want them. So,
And you know what? I mean, I guess I won't push the issue, because if he doesn't want him, he doesn't want him, because maybe
he doesn't want him. And I don't know whether I'm trying to let myself off the hook, but I have to tell you, I would feel guilty, very, very giddy about doing something with the ashes, just like throwing them away. I'm not a religious guy, but that gets into a funny place for me.
I want to wrap up this call with Michelle and Mark with Michelle's words.
You don't have to throw them away. But I think once you get through all this and you've gone through the interviews and you've talked it, you spoke it, I think that will help you wash and heal, because, this is something that, how old did you say you were? 60?
65.
Yeah, I mean, it's time to let it go. I mean, and, let it go and let it be free out of your mind and your heart, because you need to learn to let go and live and be free.
I woke up the other morning and realized that after months of learning about this story and without any real intentionally focused effort, I'd somehow formed a kind of theory about why Brian may have gone so far as to kill Ray Dahms, or at least a plausible chain of events that points to something more than a simple robbery gone wrong. That was one of my original 2 questions. Why would a 17-year-old kill someone at a gas station so close to home? And what became of him? Well, we've just learned a lot about what became of him, but we still haven't learned why Ray was killed. And we'll probably never know for sure, because even if Brian confided in someone close to him, someone who could still tell us, the odds of that story being true seem slim. For my theory, we need to remember that Brian rode his motorcycle out to Rothfork 3 times that day. In my theory, he had only planned 2 trips, but at the last minute, he went home to get his gun and returned a 3rd time. The first visit was during the day, when he stayed a while and helped Rodney Dahms tend the pumps. We know from Gary Hendrickson that Brian had been stealing since he was 8 or 9 years old, so he had the eyes of a thief trained to look for opportunity. While at the gas station, he would have noticed everything: where the money was kept, how much, and where the back door was, and how to unlock it without being detected. The place stayed open all night, so an after-hours break-in was out of the question. So maybe he came up with a sneakier plan: secretly unlock the back door, sneak in unseen late at night. Then he could sit in the back and wait until the lone gas attendant went outside to help a customer. While the attendant was checking oil or scrubbing a windshield, Brian could quickly grab the cash in the office and leave again out the back door without ever being seen. And in my theory, that's exactly what he planned to do. But something changed. You may remember that in the evening, Brian and his friend Bud Crawford went to see a movie, Help, with the Beatles. Then they had pizza in Mankato. After taking Bud home in Rapidan, Brian drove out to Rothfork gas station. Once out at Rothfork, I think it's plausible that Brian planned to buy a cup of coffee, then borrow the restroom, quietly unlock the back door, and then tell Ray and Gay that he was going home, and then leave. Then he'd just park down the road and wait for Gay to leave, then walk over, sneak into the back, and wait for Ray to go out to help a customer, and he'd take the money. But as we know, that's not how it went. Instead of just driving down the road and waiting in the cornfield, Brian went all the way home to Mankato and got his gun, and if you think about it, that gun wasn't really needed for this sneaky thief situation. If anything, a shotgun would have been clumsy, hard to hide, hard to manage on a motorcycle, and just unnecessary for a stealthy break-in. So what changed? Why did he suddenly need a gun? And then I remembered 2 things, something Mark told us, and also things Ray's friends mentioned about him. Let's start with Mark's story. You'll remember it from before. He told us about the night he got into a fight with Brian, and it started with a simple disagreement. Mark told Brian he was wrong.
I'm one of those people that don't grab me by the neck. He did something like that.
All it took for Brian to snap a little was being set in his place, told he was wrong, someone saying no to him. So what if Ray Dahms challenged Brian intellectually that night at the Rothfork? Ray Dahms was, by all accounts, a smart young man, and he could have possibly made a fool out of Brian with nothing but words. And I've learned he wasn't afraid to bump heads now and then. Could he get riled up or get someone else going? Yeah, maybe he could. Here is Gay Bulow again, his fiancée at the time.
I didn't feel that he was arrogant, but some might have called him arrogant. What I remember, he got along with all the guys very easily. He wasn't quiet though. I think actually he did get riled a couple of times.
And here's Ray's good friend and classmate, Steve Madsen.
He certainly was not afraid. He was a cocky kid. I know that Ray had some friends and enemies in Mankato, and I remember one night, I think it was after a basketball game. It was, he had state tournaments back then, and somehow or another, after the basketball game, he got in a scrape and got on the bus with a bloody nose because he got into it with somebody in Mankato.
If these two young men had some difference of opinion, Ray probably held his ground. Maybe Brian's temper took over, as it did with Mark years later. But instead of grabbing Ray by the neck, Brian went home and grabbed his gun. This is all just a type of thought experiment, hardly even a theory, but I think it feels plausible. And there's something else that always stayed with me, a small moment from the court hearing when Brian pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. When prosecutor Charles C. Johnson asked him a series of questions, one particular question stood out to me. Here is what that exchange sounded like, recreated from the transcript. Johnson is asking Brian about what happened just before Ray was killed, when Brian was hiding in the back.
Could you hear anyone in the other part?
Sounded like he was playing the pinball machine.
Did you open the door?
No, I didn't. He opened the door and saw me there.
What caused him to open the door?
I made a noise on the bench and my foot kind of hit the bench or something and made a noise.
And then came the question that still sticks with me.
Did you do it intentionally?
Meaning, did you intentionally make a sound to get Ray to come to the back of the place so you could kill him? Because I find myself wondering the same thing. Was Brian sitting in the back, stewing and steaming, replaying some small harmless comment Ray had made? It could have just been a casual remark that no one else would have thought twice about. But for Brian, it lingered and he just couldn't let it go.
Did you do it intentionally?
No, I didn't.
Perhaps you'll also remember that the cops found a spent shotgun cartridge sitting on the top of Ray's guitar on the counter. That's kind of creepy. Brian was asked about that too. But at this point in the trial proceedings, when Brian is pleading guilty to second-degree murder, everyone is just trying to wrap things up and move on.
There was one found on the counter. We were wondering if you picked it up.
I probably left it on the counter.
And of course, there were other unsettling details that the newspapers had reported on. The last song on the jukebox that night was Eve of Destruction. It sounds ominous, sure, but it was also the number one song in September of 1965, played everywhere all the time. Perhaps the eeriest detail of all was a magazine police found on the counter, left open to a story titled Murder, How to Get Away with It. I couldn't find any mention in the reports or transcripts of anyone asking Brian about that magazine, whether he'd been reading it or if he'd placed it there himself. What I do know is this. By now, whatever answer Brian might have given, I wouldn't fully believe it anyway. Now, before we go back to Rapidan to meet Ray's friends again and learn how his death shaped their lives, this quickly about Michelle, about Mark, and about me. We heard a little from Michelle about how her life turned out. Here's a little more.
Yeah, I knew when I first looked at her that we were going to be somebody together. I knew.
This is Rick again, Michelle's husband.
We've been actually, our anniversary was the 20th of this month here, 37 years. I've known her actually for 40.
Michelle and Rick have 4 kids and 10 grandchildren, and unlike others we've learned about, this family seems to be one built on trust and the truth. Rick has always known Michelle's story, being bullied in school and the choices she made when trying to cope.
I met her at 18 years old, and since then we've just kind of grown and grown and grown. And then she went to LPN school, to RN school. She actually run the hospital, pretty much run the whole hospital, the CTC in Mankato, Minnesota, and worked in the emergency room. Not only that, we run and own a business, and she does all the book work and everything. We actually run a trucking business is what we run.
I asked Rick if they were concerned that by taking part in this podcast, their grandchildren would learn about Michelle's past, the things she did, and the things she went through in her teens, including the Sauk Center Home for Girls.
Nothing that comes out of this is going to blemish or tarnish any of her reputation. I mean, like I said before, grandma and mother is number one. You know, dad is down the line a little bit because mom's always been there type thing. So no, we don't have any issue with that with the grandkids, and we've discussed that. I mean, it's not a problem and they know somewhat that she never did have the best childhood. I mean, when you look at where she was at that time and where she's at today, so no, we're not afraid of the grandkids and stuff. We as a whole family, not just between her and I, but the whole family have a good line of communication.
Clearly, Michelle and Rick share my belief that the truth is always less harmful than lies intended to kill it. I've suggested to Mark Hendrickson that when, not if, but when he decides what to do with the remains of his brother, Brian Lee Hendrickson, he should come back and tell us what letting go and finally closing the book feels like. For me, the journey of chasing Brian Hendrickson has been a long one. I've lost a lot of sleep working on it, but only because of the hours it took to get here. Nothing else. I sleep soundly these days, because I found something to console me in these uncertain times, the year 2025, something that carries me into peaceful sleep every night. It's a kind of belief, maybe even a kind of faith in something I've always felt but never quite put into words until now. The truth, like love and like progress, can be buried, delayed, or denied, but only for a while. In the end, all three will endure. Sure, some things, like the truth about Brian Hendrickson, take 60 years or more to take hold. But I sleep soundly now, knowing that if not in my lifetime, then in someone else's, humanity's compass will find its true bearing again, as it always does and always will, holding its course not constantly but consistently enough to get us there, no matter who or what tries to stop it. If there's anything I've learned about Rapidan High School's graduating class of 1965 in south central Minnesota, where the Blue Earth and Minnesota rivers meet, it is that they are and were a small, close group of kids. Here is Ray's friend and classmate Roger Funson again.
Actually, the whole school was very close, and we are still close. We're a community of people, even today, after 60 years. I still hang out with graduates from 1954, 58. It truly is a community.
A community not defined by Ray's death, but certainly touched by it and reminded of it often. Here is Rapidan's basketball coach at the time, Dean Brudwick, followed by his wife, Margot.
Well, that comes to mind anytime you see one of the boys.
And, of course, the older we get, the more we reminisce about what happened back when. So anytime things come up about Rapidan, that's always one of those memories,
One of Ray's closest friends was Steve Madsen. Steve and Ray were together a lot. They played guitar together, sang together, competed in sports together. Steve even remembers being at Ray's house the night the Beatles first appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. For Steve, the loss of Ray was one of the darkest times in his young life.
It's one of those things you can't do anything about. You can't, it's like being struck by lightning. You know, there are people out there that will kill you. Thank God there's not a lot of them. When I get up in the morning, I don't worry about what my neighbor is likely to do to me. But there's no, I don't dwell on it because it doesn't do me any good.
And here is Gay Hunsinger, or Gay Bulow, as she was named then, when she was engaged to Ray Dahms.
But as far as how often I think about it, I think probably most every year on March 30th, when he which was his birthday, I would think about him.
And she says she thinks about him in late September, around the date he was killed.
But not in a real sad way every year, just in remembering. What really caused me to think about it more in the last year or so was when Rodney died.
Rodney was Ray's brother.
And then I thought, that's the last of the family.
Ray wasn't his parents' first loss. He had a sister that preceded him in death. Here is Margot Brudwick again. She got to know the Rapidan parents in the stands at basketball games as her husband coached the young kids.
And they had lost a little girl not too long before that. She had passed away at the age of 7 with a rheumatic heart. And so anyway, when Ray died, I remember his mother saying, the only way I can survive this is by thinking that something worse could have happened to him in Vietnam. And she lived her life like that because of everything that happened in the Vietnam War. And as we found out, how terrible it really was and what all those poor young men had gone through, then she found a little bit of comfort in the fact that he never ended up in Vietnam.
In the months and years after the murder, the kids from Rapidan realized quickly that their own faces had become painful reminders for Ray's mother, Lorraine, and in different ways they found themselves pulling away. Here's Steve again.
His mom couldn't look at me without crying.
Ray's parents kept in touch with Gay, at least for a while.
They did offer me to pay for my college, for me to go to college because, I was planning on supporting Ray through college, and I did turn them down, but that was real sweet of them.
She recalls running into Ray's father one day.
I was surprised to see him, and he just see me, and great big hug, and he says, you should just stop by sometime. And, well, whenever I did stop by after he had passed away, his mom would cry. So I didn't want to do that. So I kind of just, cut ties after that. So
Steve Madsen again.
I'm not sure I ever saw his mom again because I just didn't. I didn't want to make her cry.
Steve joined the Army after school. He was stationed in Germany. The loss of Ray stayed with him, but keeping busy helped.
I lost a good friend, and like I said, it affected my life for a long time. I think the Army, for some reason, did me good. You get in the Army, they don't care what problems you have.
Roger Funson enlisted in the Air Force in 1966. It took the young man from Rapidan all over the world.
Lackland Air Force Base, Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois, Topeka, Kansas, the island of Luzon, the Philippines, Panama Canal Zone, Ecuador, and all over the place.
Later, he worked for the city's water department for 35 years.
When I got back from the service and got involved in Rapidan again, I did ask others, hey, whatever happened to that Brian Hendrickson? And whoever it was told me that the guy was already out.
Gay Bulow married a man she met at Mankato State College. They lived in New York for a time and eventually raised a family.
We ended up with 5 children. I have 16 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren.
And for Gay, what's the lasting impact of all of this?
In the scheme of things, it's drawn me closer to the Lord. I just find it sad that when people are so evil that they take somebody else's life or think they can, it should bring everybody to the Lord. If anything, they should just know that there is more to this life than what meets the eye.
If you ever find yourself in south central Minnesota, near where the Blue Earth and Minnesota rivers meet, you might want to make your way to the tiny town of Rapidan, just outside of Mankato.
It is the intersection of Blue Earth County Road 33 and County Road 9.
On the southeast corner of that intersection is a building, what used to be the Lutheran church in town, but today is the Rapidan Heritage Society and Museum. If you stop in, Paula Purvis might be there tending the place. Maybe she can take you outside, as she once did for Dakota Spotlight, and show you the exact spot where, at 13 years of age, she witnessed the apprehension of a wiry kid from Mankato, the kid who killed Ray Dahms. Or you can drive up the road to the old schoolhouse still standing there after all these years, a quiet monument to the days when a small class of kids filled its rooms with laughter and noise. The echoes have faded, but their faces and names are still alive in the memories and hearts of one another. Roger Funson can still see them, and he can recite their names from memory.
Because I can see the room, and we were always in alphabetical order. Terry B. Ment was in the front seat on the front right, and then Gay, and then Ray, and then Barb, Roger Funson, and then Carol Hansen, and then Darwin Lay, and then Marlis Kunkel, Steve Matt.
Thank you so much for joining me. Meanwhile in Mankato, Lies, Silence, and Murder in Minnesota was written, researched, edited, and produced by me, James Wolner. Additional research assistance by Mari Zoerb Hansen. If you'd like to learn more, visit dakotaspotlight.com, where you can explore 12 seasons of the show. If you have more information about this story, please send me an email at dakotaspotlight@gmail.com. Thank you again for joining me and for listening to Dakota Spotlight.